Hi and welcome, my name is Lawrence Baker and this video is going to be about how I develop a landscape image. It's going to be subjective. I'm using CC 2015 but it'll be relevant right back to at least Lightroom 4, and it's aimed at people who have probably been using Lightroom for less than 6 months. But you know, some people will always get something from other people's videos. I learn from other people even though I've been using Lightroom since it first came out. So there's something for everyone here. My workflow is quite unique, but it's not as unique as I might think. There might be other people using this workflow as well. So let's get started. This is how the image looked on import. I used a circular polarizer. That foreground is far too saturated. The grass is far too saturated, and I'd hoped the sky would be better than it was, but it isn't. And I need to give it some drama and bring it out and maybe lighten the hut up. So let's get started, because I basically got it to look on one pass, look like this, but I still don't like it, but I'm roughly going to head in that direction. So I always start with lens corrections. Now my lens is not supported on this image, but if it were, I'd enable it and that would automatically tick it under the profile section as well. I would find my camera and lens setup, and if I want to override the automatic settings or play around with distortion and vignetting, but I don't need to. So why am I using it? Well, basically, even though my lens is not supported, it will allow me to use auto, full, vertical and level. So I'm going to go for full and see if it's recognized any barrel distortion in the image, and it will try and level off the horizon, etc. So I am going to press it. Now I can remove chromatic aberration even though my lens is not supported, but I have had images where I've used the manual section of this panel to correct barrel distortion even though my lens is not supported. Constrained crop means if you've got a crop you've set already, you can tick this, but I recommend you always come to lens corrections first, then you can forget about it and then go to crop. So I've used full, that's fine for me. As I say, I can play around with the defringe sliders and get rid of chromatic aberration, but I don't have any chromatic aberration in this image. If you are in any doubt what chromatic aberration is, it'll be fringing around the edges of hard edge objects. So I don't have any, so I'm not bothered with it. That said, let's go to crop. Now I've got the normal grid showing. I can straighten the image here, etc., but I think the lens correction has done a reasonable job. What I will say to you is that the crop tool is about aspect ratio. So if I wanted to export this image now, I can't put 1000 by 1000 because that's not the aspect ratio of the image. So try and remember that when you come to export. For what I'm seeing on the screen, I'll just pick whatever I damn well like. So I'm going to pick 16 by 9. It's got 1920 by 1080 there. That's not relevant because it's just showing you what you can achieve with it. Because if I set that now and press return to accept the crop or close, it's not turned it into a 1920 by 1080 image. Not at all, but it can be turned into that because the aspect ratio is right now. So try and remember that if you're going to export something via Lightroom, you must get the aspect ratio right first, because you can't just put any old size in the export dialog box. You can't put 1000 by 1000. It doesn't work like that. You have to put some permutation of 16 by 9. And 1000 by 1000 is not 16 by 9. So let's cancel on that. Right. My next port of call will always be a basic panel. Obviously, I'm not going to use the presets. I don't really care about them. My eye decides everything. And I want this image to be quite cool, so quite bluish. So I'm going down, down, down. That's probably as far as I'm going to go. It's very green, that grass in the foreground. I could introduce a bit of magenta to see if I can take the greenness out of it a little bit, but it's actually introducing a little bit of a colour cast. So I've put plus 29 there, but if I double click on any name, I can always put it back to default. So tiny bit I'm putting on from 20 to about 31, plus 31. Exposure is about overall brightness. Try and remember that. Though it's a certain part of the histogram, it's about overall brightness, a gamma slider. If I take exposure right down, you can see I'm darkening the image right off, and that's brightening right off. So So I move exposure in small amounts. I want to brighten up a little bit. Now contrast is about making the highlights brighter and the shadows darker. I don't often use it that much, but it might help me a tiny bit here. So it's actually making the shadows darker and the highlights a bit brighter. So it's a bit of a blunt instrument, so use it with care. So I'm just going to put a +21 on that. Now you can see by that highlighted triangle there, we've got clipping. You can also see that by pressing J on your keyboard. And I've got no shadow clipping, that would show up in blue. So if I keep J pressed and come to highlights now, if I drag down, you'll see the highlights or the blown out highlights or the clipped highlights disappearing. What that means, if they're like that, is this pure white with no detail in them. So I'm going to bring it down to, I think I've got an acceptable amount of white. So I'm going to leave it at that for the time being. Now shadows, in the foreground, I want to bring out some of these pylons or bits of wood here. So I'm going to bring the shadows up quite a bit. Not too much, just about there actually, because I want some drama to the image. I don't want everything blown out. It's a bit wishy-washy at the moment. I'm now going to drag the whites down because the whites is the far end of the histogram. By dragging left, I'm moving the histogram left here, as a matter of fact. So I'm putting a bit more sort of contrast in the image, but not too much. I don't like playing around with whites and blacks too much because it can ruin your image. So I've put a bit of clipping back into the shadow areas there, and that's why I've got blue showing. Now you'll notice I'm on 1:1 and fit, and that's the default zoom in settings if you press the spacebar key. And it's also the default zoom settings if you press the Z key. So if the spacebar doesn't work, that means you're inside a tool, let's say like the graduated filter, so you need to use Z. But I prefer an 8:1 zoom in and zoom out. So you can see the shadow clipping there. If I press the spacebar key, I've zoomed out to fit. It'll always go back to fit. So whatever you pick up here, it'll go back to fit and what you've decided to zoom into. So pressing Z, the same thing happens. So remember Z or spacebar key, and remember you can change it up here. So I don't often work with the left-hand side panel on actually. So I'm going to press F7 to actually close it down. So I've got more screen real estate to play with. Right, I've got a bit of clipping in the shadows, a small amount in the highlights, and that's all right for me actually. I might just bring the exposure down slightly, very slightly, to see if I can lose a little bit of the highlights, which are clipping, which I have done. So that's going to do me for now. So I'm almost bound to come back to the exposure slider. Now, the present sliders, clarity, vibrance and saturation, are my favourite sliders, but this image is very punchy already, so I've got to be careful. If I put clarity up to 100 like that, I turn the clipping indicators off by pressing J on my keyboard. It's almost like quite a good HDR picture, but I don't want that. As I said, I think it's slightly a bit too punchy already because of the colours in the foreground. So I'm probably going to go with that +10. I normally bring it up to about 30 in a lot of my images. Vibrance is about the colours that are not very saturated already. So let's say that sky there. So I bring the vibrance up. Watch that sky getting bluer and bluer. Now it's also bringing up some parts of the grass. It's also making it quite green. So I'm going to stick it about +20. I normally bring it up higher. Saturation, well, as I think this image is too bright in the foreground, etc., I'm going to take the saturation down one hell of a lot, because I can always bring it back in with the graduated filter or the adjustment brush or the radial filter. So I'm desaturating it deliberately. But when I come down here, I'm not going to use the tone curve. I very rarely use it. I've covered it in another video, but I would honestly say you don't need it very often. When I come down here, I can shift the hue, which means I can shift the actual colour. You can't go wild. I can just go from red to orange, or orange to red, or yellow to a slightly yellower green. So I can bring the yellow down now, let's say, and play around with the image. Now, if I want to really truly play around, I'm going to double click on yellow there to zero it out. Don't forget, double clicking on a name will zero it out. So double clicking on hue will zero everything out. I'm going to use the target adjustment tool, which is here. Now, wherever I drag down, it will drag the sliders left. If I drag up, it would drag the sliders right. So I press down and I drag down. I'm making that grass really more orange, as a matter of fact. So it shows you in that grass, it wasn't just green, there was a lot of yellow. So I'm sort of playing around at the moment and thinking, well, actually, I might stay with that. I quite like it. I wouldn't normally do that with hue. But saturation, I'm definitely going to play with here. I'm going to make that a lot less green than it was. Don't forget, as I say, I've got the graduated filter to bring stuff back if I've gone too far. Luminance, I'm going to bring the luminance down there. And of course, with the target adjustment tool, it is a global adjustment. It's sampling the colours underneath where you're dragging, but any other colours in that image with the same values will be changed. So try and remember that. So I'm dragging the luminance down there and the luminance down there. One thing I can do now, and I know my spacebar won't work to zoom in, I'm going to press the Z or Z key. Now, I'm going to drag up to that flag. If I couldn't find it, I could turn on my left-hand side panel by pressing F7. I'm now going to make that flag red colour a bit more saturated and probably turn the luminosity up a bit. Not too much, because I'm seeing a bit of artifact in there. Don't forget, I'm zoomed in at 8:1. I probably can't use my spacebar now, see nothing happens. But if I press my Z key, I zoom back out. So I've boosted that flag a little bit. So with that done, I'm now going to go to graduated filter. I'm going to press M on my keyboard for mother. I could come to tools, graduated filter, or press the upright rectangular icon here. Where you drag down from is where the graduated filter is at its strongest. I used to drag up from the bottom for skies, thinking it worked the other way around. Where I'm dragging down from is where this graduated filter is at its strongest. Keep the shift key pressed because it stops it going wild and keeps it to a 45° or 90° angle, i.e. it keeps it straight. I'm going 2/3 into the image because it's a graduated filter. And to see the effect of the filter, you need to come to Tools and Adjustment Mask Overlay. It's saying I've got a green overlay at the moment. To see the overlay, I either come here or press the keyboard shortcut O. So that shows me the overlay. So don't get confused. Adjustment Mask Overlay is showing you the effect of the overlay. So that green colour showing, overlay is going to be strongest at the top and less strong at the bottom. So I don't need to have that colour green showing, so I'm going to press O on my keyboard. O for overlay is a very useful shortcut. Off it goes. Right, I want to make the sky darker. And straight away you can see those beams of sunlight coming out. Contrast might even help me here. I don't often like it, but I think I'm going to go with a bit of it, so plus 14. Highlights, ironically, I'm going to bring up a little bit because I want the beams to show up, so a little bit darker down. I'm probably clipping out the highlights here, but I don't mind a bit of white in that beam of sunlight. Shadows, well, I don't go too far. I might even bring them up slightly, actually, so the sky isn't over the top dark. Now, 2 seagulls have suddenly appeared there. I'm going to get rid of them with the spot removal tool in a minute. Clarity, I might bring up a little bit so that those beams of sunlight are quite sharp there. It will, make the clouds quite punchy, so I've got to be careful. So I might bring it down a tiny bit. Saturation, I might take that down a bit because I don't want any colour in the sky. I want this stormy effect. Sharpness, I'll bring up a tiny bit. I'm not going to play around with noise, moire or defringe because on graduated filters are a little bit pointless. But if you had any noise or moire patterns there caused by colour, distortions, you could get rid of them here, or fringing caused by chromatic aberration as well. I can also add a colour in if I wanted to, but I'm not going to, well, just to show you what it can do, I could add that blue in and you can see what it's doing now, green in. So if you want to get very artistic, I'm sure you could, but be very careful with the colours you add in. Now actually, I've added in sort of something that's I quite like, just by accident. So it just goes to show you. So I put a bit of pink into that and it's brought the sky, given it a bit of warmth. So I'm not against using this colour thing. So remember, it's there to be used. Right, I'm going to bring the slider up a bit, or the overlay up a bit, I should say, because I'm going to press O now, because the problem I've got now is that hut, and that's compressing the effect, by the way. That hut I want to lighten up. Now the Graduated filter is actually obeying these sliders here. Not very strong, but it's obeying those sliders. The problem I've got is I want to lighten that hut up, and I've actually taken the exposure down. It's obviously not going to be that strong over the hut. And in the old days, I would just got an adjustment brush and painted over it. But now I can actually take away the adjustment mask overlay or take away the effect of the graduated filter by using a brush. And the brush I need to use is the erase brush. So I need to be zoomed in. I'm going to press Z on my keyboard. Or I'm going to come here, press the space bar and click on that. So I'm in to see the image at 8:1. Far too big, going back to 4:1. I need to get rid of the green overlay on this hut. Now, my settings are 100% feather and 100% flow. That means the brush is at its strongest. Now, I've got to be careful around the edges, but on this bit here, I'm going quite quickly, and I've got auto mask on as well. So I'm going quite quickly to take away the effect of the graduated filter. Now, I'm going to bring my brush size down by using the square bracket keys. Left will make it smaller, right will make it larger. So I'm using these brushes now, and I'm going to bring the flow down to about maybe to about 60, because I don't want to bleed into the edges of the sky there. I just want to go over the hut. Now, if you used the brush like this with auto mask on, it does its best to remember or know where the edges are. Still got a bit of green there, but I'm slowly getting rid of it. I might bring the flow up a little bit more and the feather down a tiny bit. And the feather is the outer circle, and it's just the softening edge of the brush. So I'm actually getting rid of that green quite well now, and I'm not bleeding into the sky, and that's the important thing for me. And I probably would even get into this grass here because it will recognise the edges. So, you know, auto mask is not a bad enhancement actually. It works when it's got good edges like this very well. Now, I've taken away the graduated filter on that hut. So I'm going to close it down now and accept all my changes. Now I want to use the adjustment brush on it. I'm going to zoom out just to show you. So I've taken the effect of the graduated filter off that hut, and I'm going to lighten it up a tiny bit using the adjustment brush. I can press K on my keyboard, come up to Tools, Adjustment Brush, or just pressing this brush symbol here. It's far too large, as you can see. I'm going to press Z again to zoom in, make the brush smaller, and it doesn't matter about these settings here. If I picked a custom setting by mistake, I always set my own sliders, so I will just double click on it, that effect actually, to get it all to 0. All I want to do is paint on this hut. Now I need the overlay showing. I'm now going to press O on my keyboard to see the effect being painted on. Now my brush is actually quite huge here because I need to get on quite quickly before I start losing you. But I'm taking some risks here because auto mask will probably do its job quite well. So as you can see, I'm just I've got the actual flow set quite low. I might set it for 100 actually here, and I am getting quite risky with this, so I don't have to go over things too much because flow is the actual amount you're laying down each stroke. I think that'll do me. I'm going to press O off now. I'm going to zoom out because I need to see it in context. I'm going to brighten it up slightly. A little bit of lag there, guys, sorry about that. Now you see the brush is active because it's got a dark black in the middle and it's highlighted around the edge there. You can use more than one brush on your image, don't feel you're restricted. So I'm going to actually bring that temp down and make it slightly bluer. Bring the clarity up because I want the sharpness, I want that hut, you know, really showing up in the foreground. Right, that's me got rid of the graduated filter on that hut, using an adjustment brush, and I've made it look quite reasonable, I think. Now I'm going to use another graduated filter on the foreground. So you can use more than one graduated filter on an image. So I'm going to press M now. You can see I've already got one active, or not active, but one graduated filter on it. When I drag up, I'll have a new graduated filter. I'm going to bring it up to about there. Oh, I'm not frightened of overlapping my graduated filters. What I'm going to do with this one is put a bit of saturation back in the image. Now I want to see the overlay. I can press O, as you can see there. So I might bring it up a little bit further, and I might bring the exposure up in that little area there. I'll bring the shadows up as well, and actually bring the saturation up quite a lot, because don't forget I desaturated it quite a lot as well. Press O to get rid of the overlay. So it's a little bit too much exposure there, so I might bring the highlights down a bit. I'll bring the saturation quite high, because don't forget I desaturated this quite a lot. So that might do me. Sharpness, yeah, I'll bring the sharpness up because I want this showing up quite sharp. Don't forget I shifted the colours here as well. So maybe, yeah, I might even go for 100% saturation there. So I might go to the other tool, or the other graduated filter now, by pressing on that, keeping O off. I might bring it down a little bit more actually, and maybe desaturate it a little bit more, because what I'm trying to do is create a contrast between the area around the hut and this foreground. Now it's not perfect because I'm doing it quickly, so I'm going to close it down now. So that's not bad. I'm not unhappy with that. Now I'm going to go and use the last bit of the process, which is sharpening. But I have noticed two little seagulls on my right hand side, so I'm going to paint over them now. It's got rid of them. I'm not going to go into that tool too much. Clone or heal. I prefer heal most of the time, but it often does its job either way. So let's close down, especially on skies like this. So I've got rid of those seagulls there. Now all I'm going to do now is sharpen this image up. Sharpening is not straightforward. Now I prefer to be zoomed in at more than 1:1. You must be zoomed in at least at 1:1 to sharpen your image. But before I go to any zooming, I use masking. Masking is about what you don't want or want sharpened. So as I drag to the right, anything that's black won't be sharpened, anything that's white will be sharpened, and anything that's grayscale will be sharpened according to how dark or light it is. So I'm coming across now, and that's probably about right for me. I'm going to sharpen up a few clouds, but that, you know, I'm not going to over sharpen this image. Amount is about how many edges you want to pick. So it's like an edge detecting tool. At 25, it'll definitely pick the edge of that hut there. But as you go farther to the right, it'll pick up more and more edges inside the grass, let's say. So it's like an edge detecting tool. So try and remember that. And always keep Alt or Option pressed, because it's about grayscale. So you need to see the grayscale of the image. Now, as I said, I like to be zoomed in very high, at least at 8:1. That's my personal preference, but you should be zoomed in at 1:1. And sharpening is a two-part process. This is just for my screen. If I'm going to output it anywhere, I need to sharpen it again according to the medium I'm going to. Even if it's to another screen and you're going to change the size, let's say, or put it into JPEG, you need to sharpen again. And the export tools inside Lightroom, you can sharpen for screen, and screen and standard does me very well. Right, believe me, you do need to sharpen. Right, I'm going to zoom in at 8:1 by pressing the Z key. And I might pick the flag, for instance, by using the hand symbol, dragging across. There's a lot of noise in that sky. I am over zoomed into my image, but I'm now going to use the radius slider to show you what I mean by radius. Now, as I bring that flag right up, you will see on that cross on the flag that I'm creating a white halo around it, and that's basically what radius means. It's the distance between the edges. Add contrast to, because sharpening is about contrast really, so I'm going to go to about that far. I think that's fine. Now detail would be about the stuff that's in the grass, let's say. So in that grass there, that would be the finer detail. That's what the detail is all about. I don't like the detail slider on this type of image because I think it adds artifacts. So I'm not going to show it to you how it can destroy your image. I'm literally going to put it on 0 because it's not relevant for this image. So I'm going to zoom in again. I've got a bit of noise. Now with the luminance slider, again, it's a grayscale slider. If you drag to the right, it'll get rid of the noise. Now it's doing quite a good job. I can see it at the moment. Now, if I was losing detail, because what this slider does, the luminance slider, is it's like using a water on a watercolour brush or spirit on an oil painting. It's just blending that sort of graininess back in. If I was to lose detail, because every time you move that slider, the luminance slider to the right, you're losing detail. So I would normally bring that up if I needed to preserve detail. I don't have any detail I want to preserve, but I do want to preserve the contrast. So I'm going to keep the Alt key pressed here and just bring it up roughly in line. I'm going to play with it slightly. It doesn't have a massive effect, so I'm going to roughly keep it around there. Colour noise is really rare these days, but if I had any, I would play around these sliders. But what I'm telling you is, it's often not seen. If you do see it, it's very straightforward this. The colour's like the luminance slider. You don't keep the optional Alt key pressed because it's about colour. And if you're losing detail, you bring the detail slider up. And smoothness, let's say, it's about large block areas where you've got colour noise and it will smooth it off. These are the default settings, and I can honestly tell you now, if you left it at default, you won't have any problems if you've got no colour noise. So I haven't got any colour noise in this image, so we're not going to go into it. Right, I need to zoom out. I've sharpened the image up. I want to show you a before and after. Now, you know, every time I do this image, it will look slightly different. I think, actually, it's slightly too bright for my liking. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit, just a little bit, to make it a little bit more dramatic. Now, I don't like people saying, oh, you shot that. So that's not over the top. Now, they'll know that I've used some form of digital enhancement on it. So I'm not, you know, fussy about that. But if it's too much, I think, my personal opinion, that the front graduated filter, the bottom one, needs darkening down a tiny bit. So I'm going to darken it down off a little bit. And that's about right. I think I've done a reasonable job. They're going to close that down. I could keep playing around with the sliders. I just wanted the idea of light playing around on different areas. That's why I've made that slightly darker, more saturated, and that's a bit more washed out. And the sky is the sky. Now, I could play around with the sky by pressing M and hitting the button there. M means graduated filter, by the way. And I could take the exposure down a tiny bit more. But, you know, I've got to be careful here because I don't like that word shop for Photoshop. I think that's about right. Where have I come from? The backslash key will show me. I come from that, which is over the top, saturated, too orange in the foreground, the flag wasn't showing up, the hut's too dark, the sky lacked drama, to this. I don't think it's that bad. I could still play around with it. I put a bit of warmth in the sky. Maybe that might have been a mistake, but hey, you know, you can never say you've done a brilliant job. You can do it so many different ways. For now, I think that's pretty good. I hope you got something from this, guys. It was a bit rushed, but if I carried on too slowly, I would have lost you because this video is probably hovering around 25, 26 minutes already now. Thanks very much, guys.